Welcome. We're going to read the second last chapter of A Drop of Mercy, chapter 15. A crowd of people had gathered on the road in front of Christopher's house and printing shop by the time the Groffs arrived. Heinrich spotted Will and Justinia and went to stand by them. "What's happening?" Heinrich asked. "They came about an hour ago," Will said. "It looked as if they were going to clear out neighbor Sauer's house, but then the colonel went off with one of his aides. They came back with a clerk, and it's been a lot of nothing since." Justinia looked concerned. "The colonel said something about an appraiser. I fear they're valuing up his belongings." Just then, a soldier came out the front door with a Chippendale chair perched on his shoulders. None too gently, he heaved it onto the wagon parked under the tree at the front of the house. Christopher walked behind him, protesting. "That's Captain Smith," Justinia said. "He's the one who arrested neighbor Sauer back in May." "The one who cut off his beard?" Will asked. "He led the troop. It's possible he's the one that painted him up so shamefully too, though I can only speak to what I saw." "You saw him make the arrest?" "I saw them escort him from his house. The view is straight from my chambers to the lane." Smith went back into the house with Christopher close behind. "But I had no notice," he was saying. Heinrich, Will, and Justinia moved closer to the open door to listen. "That cannot be," someone said from within the house. The voice was vaguely familiar, but Heinrich couldn't place it. Whoever it was spoke with authority. The unseen speaker continued. "It was in the papers and in the handbills." Christopher was deeply upset. "I told you. I was first at the provost, then I went straight to Methacton, so I could not have seen any of those notices." "I don't make the rules, I just enforce them. Unless I see a special bail from the Supreme Court in Lancaster, your property is to be sold." "It's hardly reasonable to expect me to obey a ruling I didn't even see until it was expired." "Have you taken the oath to the states?" the speaker asked. "No." "Why not?" Smith interjected. "Were you so attached to the king?" "It was not the attachment to the king, but as you have in your act, that they which do take the oath shall not have a right to buy or sell, as I find in the book of Revelation that such a time will come when such a mark would be given, so I could not take the oath while it stood on that condition." "But you went to Philadelphia," Smith said, as he carried out a desk, apparently the mate to the Chippendale chair. "That seems attached enough to me." "You want to know why I went?" "No, nor do I want to." Smith turned and shouted up to the second floor. "What's taking you so long?" "The colonel hasn't got all week." Then he stomped back into the house. Christopher threw down his arms and followed. "This is terrible," Justinia said, even as a small line of soldiers came out bearing a mattress, 2 sacks of rice, and a small carpet. Heinrich didn't respond. He was staring at the soldier with the carpet. The fellow was about his age, but darker. It was hard to get a good look at his face, though, with the flopping carpet and the light flickering through the tree beneath which the cart was parked. But he seemed familiar and sad, tragically sad. Had he been in Nat's company? No, those were British. This fellow was a Continental. Not of the Pennsylvania First, like the others. He wasn't wearing one of their round caps, but his blue coat identified him as some kind of Pennsylvanian for sure. A sudden distress in Christopher's voice pulled Heinrich's attention back to the conversation in the house. "I will submit to all the Lord permits me to do, but I plead with you to let me keep the few medicines I've prepared for my family's use. Surely those are of little value to anyone besides myself." The official, who had yet to show his face, was obviously losing patience. "Clothes and provision, that's all they said. Clothes and provision." "Surely my spectacles are provision." They heard a quick clap, as of someone catching something fragile from the air. "Guess you can have the spectacles." Justinia gasped. They were going to take his spectacles? Heinrich took a few angry steps toward the open door. Only the steady look of his father, standing across the crowd, kept him from storming into the house. Then, as the crowd shifted, he caught a simultaneous glimpse of a familiar face exiting the house and a piebald pinto in front of the cart. The cart held Christopher's goods. The man was Colonel Thompson, commander of the Pennsylvania First. No wonder his voice had sounded so familiar. Heinrich pounded his mattress back into shape and rolled onto his side. There would be no sleeping tonight. Colonel Thompson, of all people, and he had seemed so honorable. No doubt the wagon he had been hauling out of the mud north of town, the wagon Heinrich had helped him with, was full of some other poor soul's belongings. Perhaps even that of another ill-treated preacher, or of some penniless widow. How could anyone steal from a harmless man and call it right? Is that what it meant to be a man? You had to hate? No, his father didn't hate. And he was as strong a man as anyone Heinrich had ever known. Christopher, too. Not an inch of hate in that man's body. Still, it seemed like a real man should fight against such evil as was around him. Wasn't that what Jesus did anyway? Fought against evil? No, he didn't fight against evil. He conquered it. It was different. It was too much to make sense of. Heinrich punched the mattress a few more times, forced his shoulder into the cavity he had made, and finally fell into a troubled sleep. It did little to refresh him. Early autumn found Heinrich kicking a stone that had escaped the dust of the road in front of the meeting house. Mom had let the fire die out, and he had gone to fetch a kettle of coals from Kaiser's. He kicked the stone again. Christopher had been gone for weeks, moved on to some other town where hopefully it wasn't a crime to be kind. They had sold his house to someone Heinrich didn't know. His shop, too. Not that his printing press would do anyone else much good. Heinrich kicked the stone again. They had printed all the papers that Christopher had been found to be a traitor. Nonsense. They never even gave him a trial. Kick. They even had the nerve to accuse him of burning a bunch of New Testaments before they could confiscate them. Of all the ridiculous... Slam! The stone skipped off the top of the wall surrounding the churchyard and landed somewhere among the graves. Heinrich turned into the lane beside his house and took the kettle of coals back to the kitchen. How could Mom have let the fire go out? Really? He quickly arranged the glowing coals with some new wood and banked it tight. It ought to be good and hot whenever Mom got to it. As he exited the kitchen and glanced back toward the field, he thought he saw a quick something slipping behind the barn. A rather big something. There was little enough in the barn these days, and the cave had been emptied long ago, so there wasn't much to pillage. Still, it wouldn't do to have some wild dog or bear take up residence. He ran to get his gun. Heinrich approached as quietly as a man can who knows every rock and blade of grass in his own yard, his gun loaded and ready to fire. He tiptoed around the corner of the barn. The bushes in front of the cave seemed undisturbed. He crept closer. Something rustled in the brush. He stopped short and raised his gun. Heinrich was no trigger-happy youth, but neither was he about to let some cornered beast get the drop on him. He aimed the gun at the ground in front of the bush and waited. Suddenly, something light-colored poked out from behind the bush. Heinrich waited. It crept out an inch farther, and Heinrich saw a strip of blue. Blue? Yes, Pennsylvania blue. That was no creature in the cave. It was a man. Why would a Pennsylvania soldier be hiding in his yard unless he was deserting? They whipped deserters, or worse. Heinrich turned around and retraced his steps to the house. He needed to think this one through. As he stepped through the back door, he could hear his father in the weaving room. Dottie would know what to do. Heinrich approached the loom and waited. His father was obviously concentrating on the pattern he was working. Just then a knock sounded at the door. "Get that, will you?" Dottie said, never looking up from his work. Heinrich hurried to obey. Even as he rounded the corner into the hallway, he could see through the open upper half door that their visitors were Colonel Thompson and a couple of his men. The colonel smiled in recognition. "Well, if it isn't the young road builder. And how go things in your master's kingdom, Heinrich Graf?" Heinrich did his best to hide the fact that his feelings toward his visitor had changed considerably since the last time they had met. "Good day," he said. "Is there some way I may serve you?" The colonel seemed to sense the tension. "Perhaps one of General Wayne's men has been temporarily assigned to my group, and he was found to be absent since last night. We can only assume he has deserted." Heinrich's palms became sweaty. So it was a deserter. And one of Wayne's men. Weren't they the group that had swept through his own field last autumn? That's news, he said. Folks are saying they might have seen him on this end of town. He's a younger fellow, swarthier than most, standard uniform. As a matter of fact, he was wounded somewhere around here after the battle last year, so he may know the countryside. Had a nasty gut wound, took months to heal. His division had to leave him behind. That's how I got him. Heinrich stared at the post beside the colonel. A gut wound? On this end of town? As in my yard? And did he have black powder all over his face and Nat's blood all over his bayonet? Heinrich's heart thumped heavily. What will you do when you find him? Hand him over for trial. And if they find him guilty? Then he will be treated as any other man who leaves his duty. Very well. Doesn't justice find its mark? The rascal survived his wound only to fall into the hands of the very person who knows how much he deserves to be punished. All Heinrich had to do was lead them to the cave, and they would do the rest. Right. And then he'd be just as guilty of the blood as Nat's murderer. It was all so confusing. He needed time to think. But there was no more time. He looked at Colonel Thompson, that proud guardian of patriotism and justice. I will make a special watch for the man. If I have any news to bring you, I will let you know. He stood on the back balcony and stared into the yard. The place where Nat had died was right below him. Heinrich fancied he could still see the marks of blood upon the paving stones. No, Nat's murderer lived, and all that he got was a gut wound. He looked at the path beside the kitchen and remembered the look on Nat's face when he had run off to share that loaf of hot bread with his mates. I will turn him in. The image of Nat shifted to a picture of Justinia carrying her loaves to the poor. Mercy gives to them as deserves at least, she had said. She had obviously not met this fellow, but she had seen them haul Christopher into the night. But she was a girl. What did she know about justice? I will turn him in. Something kept him from moving. Greta. She had seen what they did to her father. What would she counsel? Heinrich sighed as he fought with the answer. And then he remembered Christopher. Are you free, Heinrich? The preacher had asked him. When you know the answer to that question, you will have found a liberty that no man can take from you. Heinrich squared his shoulders and took a deep breath. He knew what he had to do. Best to do it before he lost his resolve. He filled a blanket with bread and cheese and grabbed a skin of cider. Quietly, he slipped off behind the barn. If the black-faced soldier was still hiding in there, he made no sign. Heinrich spread the blanket and sat on it as if he were having a quiet picnic by himself, though he ate little of what he had brought. After a brief time, he got up and stretched. Then he walked back to the house, apparently having forgotten to pack up the remainder of his supplies. That ends chapter 15. Next week, we will finish the book. Hope to see you then.